for having him back and sort of rehabilitated, which is what seems to be happening, ought to be that he removes the lock that he maintains personally on a whole section of the presidential archives of his period and opens those to historians, ceases to contest that in the courts.
Let me add one.
And gives an honest interview about the motive for the Watergate burglary. Then I think, you know, things could be put on a fair footing again.
This is the Wall Street Journal for Monday. It's David Shribman's piece about Bob Dole, how Dole squandered money, opportunities, dooming hopes for '88. And it leads off here as Robert Dole watched each of the 17 Super Tuesday political contests slip from his grip last Tuesday evening. A telegram arrived at his third-floor suite. Richard Nixon was urging him to fight on. Any reaction?
Well, Nixon still wants to see a race. Nixon may think that if Bush wins early on, it's bad for the Republican Party, in that it won't force Bush to sharpen his views, to display more leadership, to develop sounder reasons for describing why he wants to be president. I mean, that's the main question about Bush so far. No one really knows why it is he wants to be president other than perhaps out of a sense of duty.
Chris?
Sense of duty. No, I think that's right, actually. I think Nixon does want there to be a race. And for as long as there's a race, ex-presidents and ex-leaders of the Republican Party are in demand as advisors and consultants.
Speaking of a race, here is the front page of the Washington Times. And the headline on this story, home folks in Tennessee vouch for Gore's roots. And you can see here, this is Carthage, Tennessee. And here are two people. This is a beauty shop. You can see a picture of them. Reaction from both of you to Senator Gore.
I think he's the least qualified of all the Democratic candidates. He's not even, he's still wet behind the ears, as they say. He's almost an invention of the New Republics. He's waffled on issues probably as much as Gephardt and gotten away with it. And just personally, he does not seem to project a charismatic kind of sound leader. He's sort of, I think Chris Hitchens would probably have a field day describing Gore as kind of little rich boy image.
Well, I'd feel a bit pompous calling him wet behind the ears, since he's about the same age as I am. But I think I agree with what you say about him being candidate of the New Republic, which I think is a deplorable thing to have to be. I also think that it's one thing to notice as a politician that there's some space on the right, as there is in the Democratic race at the moment, but then to move to occupy it by pretending to hold positions you never held until you noticed that space is contemptible, and probably can be seen through even by people who are going to be impressed by the other half of his argument, which is this firm belief that he comes from Tennessee, which is something that I don't deny him. If he wants to claim that, he's welcome.
Why
there's such a big effort made to sort of prove and establish this is something that I don't understand.
Why do the polls out of Chicago show that he's got about 3% of the vote going into the primary?
Because that reflects his popularity in the North. And Mr. Hitchens doesn't understand why Gore is trying to establish a Southern kind of an image of himself as a Southerner. And that's simply because the South for the Democrats is very critical. Without winning the South, they can't win the presidency. And he needs a gimmick, something that will separate him from the rest of the pack. So he wants to run as a Southerner. It's very understandable. But again, in the North, he has no real support. No name recognition. He's very young. He may be running for future races. He wants to establish himself now as a national figure, and maybe in 4 or 8 years, he'll be a little more qualified.
In the commentary section of the Washington Times this morning, Pat Buchanan writes a column that's nationally syndicated, and the headline is, "Should the Right Take a Walk?" And let me read this paragraph right here. Frustrated, bitter at their failure to unite and stop the moderates' recapture of the party, conservatives are muttering, "Let's sit this one out. Let's let the Democrats have it all. When they foul up, as they did under President Carter, we will come back stronger than ever in 90 and 92, maybe even taking the House. Let's let Michael Dukakis' crowd be lollygagging in the barnyard when the chickens come home to roost."
I can see why the right is talking like that.
Pat, by the way, Pat Buchanan says, Well, not inaccurate as cold-blooded analysis. The sentiment is more than a little cynical. This would be true dog-in-the-manger politics, Nelson Rockefeller style, and the stakes are too large for such pettiness now.
That's boilerplate, of course. I mean, the meat of the piece is in the suggestion that the Republicans have no further claim on the loyalty of the movement right, which is probably true, but I mean, it's hard to be sympathetic to them. They were the last significant political group in the country to notice what was obvious to the rest of us from the start, which is that Ronald Reagan is a fraud. And now they realize that he didn't mean a word he really said, that he let down even his dearest friends, broke every promise he'd made even in that quarter, and they're sort of appalled and hurt and upset, and I just think it's delightful.
Well, to call Ronald Reagan a fraud is, again, something we all like to hear from people like Christopher Hitchens. I mean, would that all Republican frauds had two consecutive, on the whole, highly successful terms in which the president is extremely popular, and thanks to that popularity, his vice president emerges as the front runner for the Republican nomination. His policies, in the larger sense, have been very successful. This is one reason probably why conservatives like Jack Kemp haven't been able to make a bigger impact on the race. Paul Jagot pointed this out in the Wall Street Journal last Friday. Very good point. That a lot of what the conservatives wanted, Reagan implemented. And so the question now for conservatives is, where do we go from here? Defeatism, such as the item quoted by Buchanan, isn't the answer. Conservatives have to mature politically, and I think they will.
I don't think they can do that. I mean, that's asking a lot.
Here's The Nation. Here's what it looks like in the March 5th issue, and I'm going to open it up and look at Christopher Hitchens' column right here. And I just want to read you and get Wlady to respond to what Mr. Hitchens says. A continuing theme in the tenure of Ronald Reagan, the president of laughter and forgetting, has been the steady politicization of the Justice Department. What do you think of reference to the President of the United States as a president of laughter and forgetting?
Oh, well, it's obviously Mr. Hitchens is clever in picking up on the movie based on a Kundera novel, but I think I'd rather read Mr. Hitchens when he describes his trips to Havana and conversations with Castro and other Cubans. He seems to be more at home in pieces like that.
Mr. Hitchens?
Yeah, that's feeble even by the standards of the American Spectator. Never had a conversation with Castro. Recently wrote a report from Cuba, from the Havana Film Festival, as a matter of fact, about the failure of the Cuban Communist Party to live up to the reports of glasnost in the Soviet Union. So your remark is ignorant as well as an attempt at a slur. On the politicization of the Justice Department, I'd only add that I see yesterday Mr. Meese yet again doesn't think he should step down. And I don't know when, I don't know if it's possible to ask the question in this way, I don't know when he would ever admit to the idea of a conflict of interest. I don't know. It's so far proved impossible to show him convincingly what the idea means. There's no evidence that he understands it. I think it's actually a very serious thing. That's why I wrote that column, that the Justice Department is presided over by a man who has so many friends who are on the take, all of whose business dealings appear to be questionable, and none of whose statements on the central political scandal of this administration have turned out to be true, but had a certain marginal utility in allowing the perpetrators to get away, to cover their tracks. I mean, this is a very serious thing to have an Attorney General who's probably a crook.
Probably a crook. That's sort of been the view of Meese from day one, ever since he came to the administration and then to the Justice Department. And it emanates from people who are simply completely opposed to the Reagan view of the judiciary, of the Constitution, of the role of the courts. And so since the opposition cannot discuss these issues on their merit, they prefer to go after Meese for alleged corruption, which simply doesn't stand up. These Washington Post stories, day after day, based on nothing new. They're just trying to keep the issue alive.
We're going to go to the phones. Going to go to the phones in about 5 minutes. The numbers have been on the screen. As a matter of fact, all 8 lines are already lighted, so if you're getting a busy signal, that's the reason. You mentioned going to were you in Havana?
Mm.
What was the name of the
It's the
Cuban
Latin American Film Festival.
Film Festival. What do you think, this is Newsweek, the cover story on Jesse Jackson, what do you think when they publish photographs like that?
Of Jackson with Castro?
Yep.
Why not?
Does it hurt him? Does it help him? Does it matter?
I don't think it's designed in that case to hurt him. He can't have gone there in order to be hurt, and he certainly knew the photograph was being taken. It will only look damaging to people who don't think it's incredible that there isn't an American ambassador in Havana. I mean, there's an American ambassador in Moscow, there's an American ambassador in Czechoslovakia, there's an American ambassador in Peking. It's absurd and abnormal there isn't one in Havana.
Wlady?
There shouldn't really have to be anything exciting about it.
I'm sure that we would have an ambassador in Havana if Mr. Castro cooperated with us a little more on peace in our hemisphere. But since Castro tends to support revolutionary movements that are out to set up Soviet bases in our hemisphere, since he's running drugs or having very close contact with drug runners, since he oppresses his own people, jails them, beats them, kills them, it's a bit odd to speak of him as just anybody, any other politician.
Here's the cover of U.S. News and World Report, and the cover is about a book by Steve Emerson, Secret Warriors, inside the covert military operations of the Reagan era. But inside, I want to get your quick comment before we go to the phones. Here's a picture of a photograph of Vice President George Bush, and there's what this magazine's suggestion will be, who will be in his cabinet. And I want to get Christopher Hitchens' reaction to this. Let's go quickly down the page. At State, it would be James Baker. Nick Brady, former senator. At Treasury, Defense would be John Tower. This is the magazine's guess. Staff would be Craig Fuller, who's on his staff now, and Richard Darman, who used to be at the Treasury Department at OMB. Your reaction? That's
the sort of thing that makes Pat Buchanan go into a decline and start to have a baby. I mean, as in the article you quoted before, it's a sort of nightmare for the Republican right, all these sort of tightly buttoned moderates. I'm interested to see Craig Fuller because he's the man whose name is on the memo that may hang Bush and prevent him from becoming president.
Your reaction?
Well, again, guesswork as to who will be staffing Bush's cabinet and administration. Naturally, I think it will veer toward people who are rather established in Washington and have a more moderate persuasion. But again, it doesn't mean conservatives have to despair. People like Darman came around quite a bit while he was in the administration, and there's no reason to think that others may not as well. The right has to remain articulate, vocal, and confident, and I think then conservatives will have a voice. Here's a photograph of the governor of Massachusetts, and I want to get your quick reaction to what kind of a president this man would be before we grab our first call. He would make Bush look like a lost opportunity. He's completely ignorant on foreign policy. He's been the benefactor of his predecessors' economic policies in his own state. I mean, he walked into a thriving economy, and he's now trying to profit from that politically. It's helped him financially. He's made a killing in raising money in Massachusetts, which is one reason why he's doing so well, because he's simply very well financed. Chris Hitchens?
I don't think he's ignorant on foreign policy. I mean, he's one of the few candidates ever to have worked abroad or to speak another language apart from English. I think he also does speak Greek, so that makes three. On Central America, he has I think, the soundest policy of all the candidates. He correctly describes the Reagan administration's intervention there as illegal as well as disastrous, and says it would stop. And when he was governor of Massachusetts, he pardoned Sacco and Vanzetti.
Let's grab a call. Columbus, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I've got a comment for your guest that wearing the glasses. In reference to Jesse Jackson, the negative comment he made about him, in reference to Jackson taking a picture with Fidel Castro.
Go right ahead, sir.
Well, my question to him is, excuse me, what is the difference between Jesse Jackson taking a photo with Castro than with Ronald Reagan shaking hands with Gorbachev? Don't both countries have the same policy as far as how they are depressing their own people?
Thank you, sir.
No, President Reagan was meeting with Mr. Gorbachev as part of official U.S. policy. It was a summit meeting. Fidel Castro met with Jesse Jackson traveled to Fidel Castro as a private citizen. He was expressing his personal preference for Castro. It's not the same thing at all.
Wlady Plesczcynski is originally from Santa Barbara, California. We go next to Seattle, Washington.
Good morning. First of all, Brian, I want to say that I got cut off twice last week.
Well, if you got cut off, were you on the show at all?
Well, yeah, but then just before I was ready to get on, I got cut off, and then I called back Wednesday after, because I'd been to the caucus, and he told me to call back on the Super Tuesday number, and I told